the president-elect really wants to see peace in these, in these hot regions, and so a lot of the families believe that the president-elect's statement this week could kickstart some of the negotiations, especially as Hamas, which has been unwilling to compromise on certain things, may be a little bit more willing to.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan issued a stark warning about war with China. What did he have to say?
So Jake Sullivan talked earlier this week about sort of what a war with China could look like and what the U.S. has to do now ahead of such a conflict to make sure they would be prepared. And so the big thing he talked about was continuing what the administration has done in sort of elevating and increasing the productivity of the defense industrial base. And so the example he used is 155 millimeter artillery. And so this is the type of artillery that Ukraine has used most commonly and most frequently. And so the U.S. has been producing and trying to ramp up the amount they can produce simply to get it all to Ukraine as quickly as possible because of how quickly they're going through it. And so there was an 8-week period, he said, during the beginning of the war where they were using, they used essentially a year's supply of U.S. 155 ammunition. And so that just goes to show sort of how depleted U.S. stockpiles could get as they're aiding an ally.
Right.
And so through all the weapons they've given to Ukraine as well as the weapons they've given to Israel, not all of the weapons overlap with what the U.S. military believes they would need if they were to go to war with China, but there is some overlap. And so the 155 millimeter artillery is an example of how the U.S., by helping an ally, is actually, to some extent, hurting its own readiness. But at the same time, what Jake Sullivan was arguing is that it served as a wake-up call for the administration because through the U.S., over the last 20 years or so, since the fall of the Soviet Union, the defense industrial base sort of took a step back. And so now seeing the effects of the war in Ukraine, they've begun ramping up production on these things. And it was Jake Sullivan's call for the Trump administration and future administrations to continue this. And he said, specifically, it might be longer than a decade before the U.S. can really feel like that they can breathe a sigh of relief, is the phrase he used. And so it really just demonstrated the sort of significance of getting the defense industrial base up to where the U.S. government believes it needs to be prepared for such a war.
And President-elect Trump talked a little bit about some of the things that needed to be done to shore up the U.S. defense industrial base, too. Says it's one of the reasons why he's pursuing a sort of nationalist economic policy.
That's exactly right. And it's not something that was uncommon from Trump's first administration before the war in Ukraine even began. We saw him really push NATO allies to increase their defense spending, and then we saw the implications of that during the Biden administration, in which a lot of countries finally met the 2% threshold.
So there are some hopes that people have, particularly people who have families that are held hostage by Hamas, about what might happen in the incoming Trump administration.
So President Trump released a statement earlier this week threatening that there would be hell to pay if Hamas did not release the hostages by the time he was inaugurated on January 20th. And so there are a couple reasons why that's a big deal. The first is that the president-elect wants to see a deal done before he reaches office. And he made that really clear, in part because he doesn't want to be bogged down by this. He also has said similar things about the war in Ukraine, about how he will try and bring it to an end. And so the president-elect really wants to see peace in these, in these hot regions. And so a lot of the families believe that the president-elect's statement this week could kickstart some of the negotiations, especially as Hamas, which has been unwilling to compromise on certain things, may be a little bit more willing to.
Pete Hegseth, who is President-elect Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense, has already been meeting with mainly Republican senators, but he's been meeting with members of the Senate. Where do things stand right now?
So it's definitely one of President-elect Trump's more contentious nominations. And so while there are a lot of signs that indicate he might get through, there are also some signs that pose some risks to his nomination. He was accused in 2017 of sexually assaulting a woman, and he was married at the time. That being said, the woman days later went to a hospital. The incident was reported to the police. There was an investigation, and he was not charged. At the same time, years later, he also did agree to a settlement with this woman to head off a lawsuit. That's one incident. And then there have also been a number of reports concerning his consumption of alcohol and whether or not he has been inappropriately drinking on the job at any of his previous roles since he left the military. And so he's faced questions about some of that behavior, and he has really stood firm in his nomination. He has continued to say that he won't back down. That being said, the Republicans have a slim majority going into the Senate, and he does not have a lot of wiggle room to lose Republican support.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at WashingtonExaminer.com.